All right, everybody, welcome. It is 2:40. We're about 10 minutes behind, but we're going to go ahead and begin our work session for today, October 21st, 2025. First up, we have feedback and review for the 2026 and 2027 school enrollment program. We have Mr. Carrozza and Ms. Pulliam.
Ms. Williams getting it all set up?
We'll give you a moment, so do you want to share what we've done so far?
Yep. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the board for being open and honest with us about what you expect from us for this particular process. We hope that this feedback will check all the boxes of the things that you've wanted us to do over the last several years in improving this process for families. I really do want to take a moment, though, to thank Susan. Susan and her team have done a tremendous job with getting out, talking to parents, using the thought exchange, making sure that we're having face-to-face and virtual sessions so people can all feel heard throughout this process. We think the thought exchange that we're using, providing anonymous feedback, is an upgrade from what we've used in the past because it's able to get honest feedback on both sides of the argument. And you'll see in the feedback and the materials you have today, Susan and her team have done a tremendous job of going through, answering particular questions, and making sure that everyone feels heard throughout this process. And so really excited for the public hearing tonight that will happen at the board meeting. And again, after that, we will then turn this process over to you, and then we will take any feedback from you into any potential changes for the final draft, which is still on par for November 18th for a final vote for the board. Okay? Before we get started, are there any questions or concerns or things that you've noticed or heard throughout this process before we get started that we should be aware of just moving forward?
Anyone? All right.
Okay. All right, good. All right. So in just a second, we'll pull this up and get it started.
You'll notice that with your paper materials that you received today, you also received a copy of the current version of the Public Engagement Summary Report. We just thought it might be helpful to have that on hand during the hearing, since a lot of the comments we're expecting to hear during the hearing would relate to information that's already included in your packet. We'll talk through that in a little bit, but I wanted to make sure you had a paper copy just in case you wanted to take notes directly in the margins. You'll notice there are other attachments that are included. This is in response to board feedback that on occasion our presentations are really lengthy because we're working on making sure everyone who's listening is getting all the information that's been carried forward. So we've started putting that in as resources in the packet versus asking you all to sit through and rehear the same information multiple times. So those review materials are labeled with letters just to sequentially kind of walk you through the order in which to review them. And through the power of magic and technology, we should now be ready. Thank you for your patience. That was a quick turnaround between the committee meeting and the work session. Ready?
All right, ready.
Okay. So again, today's presentation is intended to be a review of all the feedback that's been collected since the September release of the initial draft, including any recommended adjustments to the plan. We have 5 core objectives for today. First, to just quickly, as I mentioned, briefly talk about the planning process, give you a little bit of feedback that we've received from our recent public engagement activities. We'll spend the bulk of our time responding to that feedback and sharing with you those responses that we've put together. And we will also talk about those recommended adjustments. And before we leave today, we just want to firm up and finalize where we are in the planning timeline. We always want to remind you of how this work aligns with the strategic plan, specifically AIMS 6 and 12 within family and community engagement, as well as AIMS 14 and 19 within operational effectiveness. And of course, Board Policy 4150 is the guideposts that are set for us in developing and making recommendations for assignment plans with 4 core pillars: student achievement, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency, all of which have very specific definitions in policy that are particular to the nature of the process. A full copy of this policy, as well as video explaining the policy, are located on the district's website. And the 2 websites that we've created for this process are still live and active with the migration. I think you may have talked about it a little bit, but the migration to the new website, all of them are still functioning and fully available to the community. So the planning process, we're still in step 4. We've been here for a while. We're getting ever so much closer to moving into step 5. So we are very much getting ready to close out this portion of the process. I thought it would be appropriate to just take a brief moment and remind you that as we kickstarted this process, we started with public engagement happening in the spring, and we always want to remind families that it is valuable for them to participate in these processes. Here you see a list of things that have changed over time and been included in our planning process as a result of the feedback we've collected, particularly over the last, I'd say, 3 or so years. That public engagement kicks off in the springtime, so usually around March is when we start those initial outreach efforts. And the information, I think I mentioned it to you, you've all been given a paper copy of the current version of the public engagement summary report. So all the details of all the public engagement, even dating back as far as 2022, are included in the report that's relevant to this year's assignment plan. The planning implications going into this year's plan from all of that engagement were to continue to focus on areas like stability, calendar continuity, cohort continuity, capacity management, and of course balancing all of those within our policy guidance. In May, we talked with you about your goals for the plan, and we made sure that we reviewed those together, and so that's that second step in this portion of the process. We clarified and specified the goals for this year's plan were specific to opening the new elementary school, Hilltop Needmore Elementary, and aligning the middle and high school feeder patterns for the opening of that school, as well as any domino impacts in the area based on capacity that's being made available as the new elementary school opens. We looked at renovation projects and made the decision that at this time, we don't need to have any reassignments related to those. We're going to give schools like Swift Creek a year or so to move into their newly renovated facility before making any recommendations, which is a similar process we used when Bochum went into its newly renovated campus and Fuquay-Varina Middle went into theirs. For crowding and transportation, there are some elements of this year's plan that do address the ongoing crowding at certain schools and high-growth areas, and also evaluating assignment areas that have inefficient transportation routes. And we did have the handful of carryover items from last year's enrollment plan to align calendar and cohort feeder patterns for certain families, particularly in the Apex area. Which brought us to where we have been since September 2nd. So today we will review the public feedback that we've received so far since the release of the initial draft in September, as well as any recommended revisions. And again, one last plug, and I won't say it anymore, all of the summaries of the public engagement, including detailed analysis, are included in the report that's included with your board materials. So let's start by looking at some of our participation at the in-person events. So or live, I should say, events. We had 3 live virtual sessions and 1 in-person open house. This is a format we kicked off last year by having an open house again, an in-person open house with a resource fair, if you will, included. And so at the beginning of this process, September 9th, 11th, and 17th, we hosted virtual information sessions. You can see that adding in the participation at the open house, we had approximately 805 total participants, either during the live event or through watching the recording of some of our virtual sessions, as well as the attendance at the open house. I do want to draw your attention to the odd way we're doing the math for the open house. We had 44 families check in. We realized there was a deficiency in our check-in system. It didn't account for the fact that many of those families brought children with them or more than one person. So by a range of anywhere from 1 to 6 members per family, we estimate that we had around 100 actual participants at the event. So very similar to the showing last year when we were actually opening 4 new schools. For the Hilltop Needmore Elementary virtual session that was held on September 9th, during the live session, people were posting questions and we were reviewing those and using a little bit of AI support to help us summarize those. We identified these key areas of interest or key takeaways that came from that particular session. I won't go through all of them. You could read them. They're all available for you in your summary reports as well, but I'll draw your attention to areas like guidance on registration and administrative logistics. That was new for us. We had a lot of families that were excited about being assigned to Hilltop Meadmore, going, well, so then where would we register? How would I make sure my student gets to go there? If I'm already attending a school like Banks Road, do I have to take any specific action to make sure my student gets to go to the new school if they're part of the reassignment? So that was new for us. We hadn't had questions like that over the last couple of years. In addition, interest in transportation details. Again, getting really excited about the opening of the new school, wanting to know what will the bus routes look like, what portions of the neighborhoods will be considered no transport or walk areas, which areas will have routes and where will those stops be. And so we're very excited that you're excited. It's a little early in the process to announce those details, but we have shared that type of information with our partners in transportation, so as soon as it's available, we can make sure it's ready for those families. And then concerns around special education services. We had very concrete questions about how will my students' IEP be served? Are there going to be occupational therapists on hand or speech therapists on hand? And so we did share out those questions with our special education department. They've given us wonderful responses, and they've already been loaded onto the website, so families with those specific questions can get those answers there. The short answer is yes, we'll be ready to serve your students, but there's a little bit more detail and nuance to that. So that's what's wonderful about these sessions, is we're also able to capture those questions that maybe aren't specifically part of the school choice planning and assignment team's area of responsibility, share them out with our colleagues in other departments, and get those responses posted so families can get those answers as quickly as possible. So we do want families to continue to visit the FAQ portion of the enrollment proposal site, because it is updated almost weekly at this point. On September 11th, we had a specific session with an intentional focus on Apex and the southwestern area recommendations that are included in this year's plan. And again, you can see a long list of areas. You'll see that there's some carry forwards, right? Stability, please don't change my assignment, calendar continuity. You'll see those as a common thread through all of these. Thought we would highlight the year-round versus traditional frustration in this area. We maybe purchased a home thinking that this would be the school assignment for a long period of time based on a particular calendar, and now the recommendations are changing us to a school on a different calendar. That's very frustrating for families. Equity and fairness in assignments, concerns about, why our neighborhood and not someone else's neighborhood? Why not choose, a different area? Why not choose an area that doesn't already have students in it? Those types of questions. And then appreciation amid concerns. So despite all of the frustrations in a couple of these sessions, there were some families and community members that specifically said we're appreciative of the opportunity to at least ask our questions and have them heard and answered, even though we know this is a difficult process and a challenge that's hard to find solutions for that meet everybody's needs. Looking on to the September 17th session, that one focused on the eastern area. We also pitched this one as a general catch-all for anybody who might not have been able to attend the first two live sessions. So you'll notice on the bottom right it says Crooked Creek community. That's part of the Hilltop Meadmore recommendations, so clearly that community felt like they maybe missed the live session and came to this one. However, specific to this area, calendar misalignment across feeders. In the eastern area, you have traditional, you have modified, you have single track, you have multi-track, you have early college calendars, and families just expressing that sometimes that's difficult to manage when they have children across multiple grades. The stability piece, what's the sibling stability look like? Questions about how long are those stability transfers valid for? Can my student stay through the end of 5th grade, or do I have to ask every year? These are questions we do get regularly year after year, but we're glad to have them because we want to make sure that we can provide clarity for families around those concerns. And as I mentioned, you see the little pop-in of the Crooked Creek. That represents that people did take our sort of invitation to come as a general session to this one and ask those continuing questions that they have. The open house that we hosted, as you can see, this is sort of the laundry list of, if you will call it a resource fair type environment that we created. On the left are all of our wonderful partners from our internal departments, anywhere from academics to translation services, just doing that as an alphabetical list. We had close to 40 or more staff members present from other areas to be able to support our families that had questions about how does this service transfer? How does my child nutrition services support, my cafeteria support, how does that transfer with my student if they go to a new school? Before and after school care, how does that work at a new school? How do we know whether or not they're going to have on-site or off-site? So we had representatives from a lot of departments that were there, and we're so grateful for them. And this year we had it set up where families sort of walked through the fair on the way in and out of the main event. That worked perfectly, so they had multiple opportunities to engage with those resources. In the area where we had all of the school representatives, you can see the list of schools that were all represented. We really focus on having tables set up for the schools that will be receiving students, so families can ask questions about that environment, that culture, what do you have at your school academically, extracurricular, how does scheduling work, if I want a track request for schools that maybe are multi-track. So those types of staff were the ones that we had tabled. However, we also had the floating staff from the schools that were impacted. So staff from White Oak Elementary was present, even though they're losing students, quote unquote, in the current proposal. So it was just a great mix of, we also had area superintendents, Mr. Enns, Mr. Overman, and Dr. Thompson all came and joined us to support the event and families with questions. In addition, of course, to our full school choice planning and assignment team. This was great. It was great. Good vibes, good energy, lots of moving and mixing, and people truly appreciated the open house format, so there wasn't a schedule. They could just float in as their schedule worked. And those tables that brought candy, they were the big winners for our students.
It was successful also being able to conduct it at the brand-new school,
Yeah.
because you saw a lot of children who were excited about the school, a lot of families asking for tours, and so we set them up for future tour with the new principal that will be coming on board down the road, but really excited to see the new school and really, the beautiful property. It's on a great piece of property.
Creates a different kind of buzz when you get to see the school you're going to maybe get to go to. So participation numbers for our other events. We have our website that's continuing to rock and roll. We've had over 6,400 visits to the assignment planning site in general, and the public engagement page has received over 2,000 visits. The specific site for this year's enrollment proposal, however, trumps them all at over 16,000 visits since its launch on September 2nd, and that was as of October 14th, so I imagine it's continuing to grow as we speak. Our live sessions, as I mentioned, we had a little over 100 participants at the open house. We had 269 participants in the live virtual sessions and an additional 436 views of the recordings, again, through October 14th. So those numbers will continue to grow a little bit as we get closer to the 18th. The online forum we use, again, is Thought Exchange. We had 835 participants post 758 thoughts. And so let's look into that a little bit deeper. This is our most accessible way for families to participate because they can choose their language, they can participate from any device, anywhere, at any time. There's no time restrictions. And it was open from September 2nd through October 5th. So, and we sent, this year, I think, a little bit differently. We made sure we put reminders in our community message weekly to families, even if they weren't in the impacted areas, so that everybody would be reminded that this was open and we were soliciting feedback and thoughts. As you can see, the core question that was asked is specific to what are your thoughts about what's included in the initial draft. And you can see here the sort of breakdown of the numbers. So 835 participants posted 758 thoughts. That means there are a number of participants who just came to look. Maybe they just came to rate. I will say with the 29,660 ratings, that means we had probably our highest rating per thought participation since we've started using this platform for school assignment purposes. So we had well over the 30 is sort of ideal. If you can get 30 ratings per thought on average, that's a really excellent participation. We were nearing 39 ratings per thought on average. So really people taking it seriously that they needed to go in and rate those thoughts. That was sort of 1 to 5 scale. This is the traditional base format for Thought Exchange. I think we've shared with you there are many other modules that they've added in over the years. We'll be using a different version of it as we go into this next round. We had 94% of the participants indicate that they were either parents or guardians. This is not a choose one, so you will see this doesn't add up to 100 because if I'm a parent and a staff member, I can select both of those. If I'm a student and identify as a community member, I could potentially select 2 of those. You see that we had actually 22 people participate indicating that they are students within the district. We'd love to see that number go up, but it's always fun to see. And you can sometimes tell which ones are theirs based on the phrasing and the language. But it's great to see when students are participating. We obviously had a large percentage participating in the western portion of the county. We let everybody self-identify their areas based on how they identify based on their municipality. However, since we've started doing that, I think we've gotten more authentic results than if we just say generically pick one. So the other thing we did differently this year is we mentioned a couple of times, this particular platform has decent amount of AI supporting it, and it allows us to use it sort of rapidly to look differently at the comments. And one thing we've been using over the last several years is what I call global themes. What is the sort of top 5, if you will, that are coming out of it? And sometimes some nuance can get lost when we stay in that space. So this year you're going to see me showing you how they're globally sort of organized and then a little bit more granular approach. And I want you to see both of those angles to know that that's how staff is looking at it if we don't always communicate it here at the table. But our total number of comments were most highly rated in the area of community disruption. That was a common theme this year. We feel really connected to our school. We build partnerships and relationships. Our students have friends here, or we've invested our time and efforts into being a part of this particular community, so just disrupting that to take us to a new school. Lots of thoughts in that kind of category. Equity and fairness, I touched on that a little bit in the opening remarks. School ranking concerns, transportation and commuting, and calendar changes. When we switch to the STAR score, so that 39-ish ratings per thought sort of outcome, we see that it really levels off. So although community disruption had the most quantity of thoughts, the rating across all the other areas was relatively similar, around a 3.5, slightly above. I think school ranking concerns was a little bit below a 3.5. I would pause here to say that a 3.5 really is an indication of low alignment. Right? If you're not getting 4s and above, meaning everyone consistently supports and agrees on these thoughts and ideas, we've got both sides of the coin here. Some people I get that there's community disruption, but it's not that big of a deal. We have some saying, I get there's calendar changes, but it's really not that big of a deal. So we've got people sort of in the community, as Glenn sort of mentioned, anonymously being able to represent both sides of each issue. So that makes it more challenging for us as staff because it's hard to tell what's most important to the entire community. The other thing I would encourage those that are watching to do is to go onto the website. We have an interactive link. You can actually click on a bar and see what those comments are and see what the rates are, so you can see the level of detail that we as staff have as well. This is just to give you a quick breakdown. I won't read through them, but it lets you know the kinds of thoughts that were organized into each of those global themes. And we're 10 minutes behind. Here, though, this is that deep dive a little bit deeper. Let's look at this a little bit more granularly. What do we mean when we say community disruption? We're talking about specific communities. We had certain communities really go in and reiterate to us multiple times, this particular community has concerns. This particular community feels a certain way. We had the preference for traditional calendar versus calendar changes, right? That's a very much more nuanced take on that particular question. Stability and consistency, I think, without a doubt, that has been a theme through every single engagement we've probably ever had since we started doing assignment changes back in the 80s, right? We just don't want to change. And if I have to change, then let's take all these other things into consideration. So it gives us a little bit, the calendar changes becomes its own category separate from preference for traditional calendar. And that's different, right? That's, I'm on this calendar and I'm being asked to switch to a different calendar because of the reassignment, right? That's a nuanced sort of perspective versus just calendar issues. So when these get reorganized by the STAR scores, a similar phenomena to the global themes. 3.5-ish is about our highest rating. So getting anything to rise up into a 4 has been really challenging this year. We can't see combined energy toward one idea. Just something for us to note. So the thoughts on the initial draft and the granular themes, this gives you an idea of the kinds of comments that would be organized into each of those granular ideas, aside from the ones I've already sort of teased out. However, I think what's really most important for us to think about is, okay, it's been very clear. We support this, but we support that. This is a big deal. This isn't a big deal. Where do we align? So one core example for us is, we just don't want to be reassigned, right? We just don't want to change. And I get that. I understand that. And please know the planning team does everything we can to minimize the total number of families impacted, because we get that. Change is just not preferable for anyone if we don't have to do it. And then the other's like, well, but we see the benefits. We see that moving students around will maybe balance populations of schools. One's overcrowded, one's under-enrolled. It might create a better distribution of resources, because I think our community is very keenly aware that head count equals resources for schools at a base level, right? So there's some comments there saying, well, maybe the redistribution, it sort of outweighs change, right? Not wanting to change. But either way, regardless of what side of that fence the family was sitting on, they could all agree that we need to be fair, we need to have stability wherever possible, so that the assignment changes are less abrupt. And again, in honor of Rod Malone, our favorite websites. So what then does all that mean? So let's dig deeply into these. We really started looking at some very specific thoughts and comments, and we've highlighted a few for you here in the presentation. Obviously, there's more details in the full report. But there are some families specifically in the area impacted by the opening of the new Hilltop Needmore Elementary. They're kind of okay with that, right? That sort of made sense to them. We've been talking to that community for going on 3 years now, so they've kind of understood what was coming. But the alignment from Herbert Akins Middle to Westlake Middle and from Willow Spring High to Middle Creek High, that felt a little, I'm not so sure we're super excited about that. There's concerns about the potential disruptions to academic and social development for students, particularly in those upper grades when you're making those long-range plans for how you're going to build out your schedule at the high school level. They feel, and a lot of times, that the current assignments are more proximate to the proposed assignments, and of course, valuing just those community connections that they've established with their current schools. And so just to remind you, the area that we're talking about, the area highlighted on your left represents the current state of things for the elementary school. On the right, that yellow area would be the future Hilltop Needmore base attendance area if you were to accept the draft as it's currently proposed. That same area is not aligned at the middle school level. And as you'll recall, we've reported to you on multiple occasions, cohort continuity is a big issue for our families across the district, regardless of region. If my students are going to 5th grade with this group of students, I'd really like them to go on to 6th grade with that same group of students. And so you'll see here what represents that sort of light blue area on the right is aligning that so that all of the students at Hilltop Needmore would go to one middle school, Westlake. In addition, it solves a crowding concern in the region. Herbert Akins Road Middle is in a high growth area. It's already getting kind of full. We're sort of pushing the limits here. And with our recommendation that Hilltop Needmore start on a track 4 operating, even though it'll be identified as a multi-track school, that being able to go to Westlake creates all that calendar alignment for those families as well. They'll know they're on track 4 the whole time, and it relieves some pressure for Herbert Akins Road Middle. So this was a dual-pronged cohort alignment as well as addressing crowding in the region. And then at the high school level, similar concept. This area then would all go on to Middle Creek because Westlake Middle, for large part, goes to Middle Creek High School, so that creates that cohort continuity. And so then that would also allow us to address the growing membership at Willow Spring, being that it's one of our southernmost schools. There's nowhere else to go but sort of up. So allowing us to utilize some of the capacity there at Middle Creek High School. So it creates cohort alignment and takes better advantage of the capacity in the region. So here you see the detailed response. I'll go through this one line by line, and then the others will kind of hop around once you get the flow of them. But here you'll see that, so our initial response as staff is that the primary objective of this particular assignment recommendation was to not only fill the new Hilltop Needmore Elementary, but to align those middle and high school feeder patterns, as well as to address the ongoing crowding in the region. So the benefits of the reassignment, I sort of mentioned as I was going through the visuals, is that Westlake Middle and Middle Creek High have available capacity. They will allow for a stable assignment for the foreseeable future. We're looking out, in the out years, as much as 10 years ahead. Westlake Middle is already on track 4, so if Hilltop opens and operates on track 4 per our recommendation, that creates a beautiful calendar alignment as well, K-8 for those families, and then it just allows for better resource distribution and allocation across all the campuses in the area. For stability purposes, since all of these are existing schools, Westlake Middle, Herbert Akins Road Middle, Willow Spring High, Middle Creek High, any student that's already attending Herbert Akins Road Middle or Willow Spring High that would like to stay there, we're prepared to do those generous stability transfers that we've been doing for the last couple of years, as long as the families can provide transportation. That then gives them the ability to bring in a rising 6th or 9th grade sibling if needed, and moving forward, if they're still there, they could bring in those rising 6th or 9th grade students, so that the family could maintain that relationship with the school for all of their family, as long as the students are close enough together in age. As far as transition support goes, on the opposite side, if you'll take the new assignment, the staff is welcoming and inviting. I think our biggest contingency at the open house was from Westlake Middle and Middle Creek High School. They were so excited to welcome families into their campuses with open arms and help them figure out how to make that transition smooth, manage academic concerns, extracurricular concerns, all of those. As far as distance goes, the Westlake Middle and Herbert Akins areas are about equidistant, right? They're really not too much further or closer. And actually, in some areas, they're a little bit closer to Westlake Middle. Some areas, they're a little bit closer to Herbert Akins Road Middle. It's not that different distance-wise. The high school's a little bit different. The portion that's a little bit closer to Hilltop Needmore obviously is a little bit closer to Middle Creek High School, but the area that's right there at Willow Spring, it is going to be a farther distance. It's on the order of about 4 miles, and at the high school level, that's not too terribly far, but it is about up to 4 miles farther for some of those families. So we do acknowledge it's not the most proximate school, but as Glenn has taught me to say, the most proximate school with available capacity. And so that kind of is the way we go through our rationale. Again, I won't step through every single one of the next sets, but I wanted you to see how we laid out that for you so you could have that understanding from the planning team's perspective as to why we didn't recommend a change. So the next group is the families residing in the Crestmont and Pines communities. They have asked to remain assigned to White Oak Elementary and Mills Park Middle rather than being assigned to Turner Creek and Salem Middle. Similar issues, they value their community connections. They don't want to have a disruption in their academic sort of paths that they've set for themselves and opportunities that are there. So just as a quick reminder, you'll see this one a couple of times. This is an area that already is experiencing such crowding that many of their schools are capped. Both of the ones we're talking about are White Oak and Mills Park. And by the blue arrows that you see on the right, that shows the projected growth in this area. So it has not stabilized or stopped. We still have more families and students coming into this area. So the area that specifically where Crestmont and Pines are is roughly where you can kind of see these ovals on the left and the right of the screen. I tried to zoom in a little bit so you could see it's sort of the southern area of the recommended portion to be assigned from White Oak into Turner Creek, and then again from Mills Park into Salem Middle. And again, this is the hard one because we had a lot of families asking, we see that there's new developments in the White Oak base. Why aren't you moving those? And it's because White Oak's already full. We need immediate relief, and the only way to provide immediate relief is to move actual students, not future neighborhoods. So right now, White Oak needs immediate relief so that they can continue to serve families that are in the remaining portion of their base attendance area, and we will continue to monitor the school over time to determine if additional recommendations are needed in the out years. I will say candidly, we came to this community early last year and this year saying, would multi-track be preferred to be being reassigned? And that was a hard no. And so in response to the community saying we'd really prefer to keep the traditional calendar, that's really important to us, reassign if needed, we kind of went that path yet with the stability rules. So that way the existing families that are in these communities, if they're already attending White Oak, already attending Mills Park, they can certainly stay through the 5th and 8th grade respectively, as long as they can provide transportation. Because the transportation in these communities will now be routed to the east, to serve the base attendance areas for Turner Creek and Salem. So we get this one's hard. We do understand that completely. Again, this is to provide relief to Mills Park. It's stabilizing a little bit. What's hard, and I think Mills Park is a perfect example because it's been capped for so long. Notice its capacity with trailers is 1,352. It consistently runs close to 1,600 based on your approved cap. So they think that's normal. And it's not, right? It's taxing the resources on the building. It's asking the school to function in a way that no other middle school in the district is functioning and operating. And while they've done a great job of making it work and providing an amazing academic environment for their students, they just shouldn't have to work this hard to serve that many students. It's not how the system was designed to function. And so this would provide a little bit of relief. Notice it's not enough, because remember, to the north of this, the new Parkside Middle will be opening in a couple of years and provide that last little bit of relief that the school will need long term. So you can see here, I've sort of talked you through it. I don't know that I need to go through it bullet point by bullet point. In this case, because they're on that lower portion of the attendance area, they're either closer to or not much farther from either of the two schools. They're kind of in a little equidistant spot between White Oak and Turner Creek and Mills Park and Salem Middle. Same region, just a little bit north. This is the Sutherland community. I believe they even provided a petition during one of your previous board meetings. Same basic concern. We'd really rather stay and have someone else go, so we've kind of addressed that point, that it's about finding communities that are already have students in them. And it's also about collecting all those communities together, similar to conversations we had last year. A handful of smaller neighborhoods cobbled together creates an impact. So taking any one of them out reduces the ability of the plan to meet its goals. So again, same region, same high growth concerns, just a little bit different portion of the map. It's the northern area that you see there that's highlighted. They're in that rough region, but you'll notice it's embedded in a bigger region. So if that whole region comes, that provides the relief we're looking for so that White Oak can continue on traditional. It's probably still going to need to be capped for the time being, but it buys us some time to figure out what that longer range solution will be for that school. Again, immediate crowding concerns, trying to relieve those and distribute the resources across the schools a little bit more evenly in this community. Mills Park is the base attendance area currently for that same community. And so again, the same concerns here at Mills Park as we talked about with the other community. Slightly different nuance. It is a little bit farther for some of these families to go to these newly assigned schools because they are slightly more proximate to White Oak and Mills Park. But I think it's on the order of 2-ish miles, maybe a little bit more depending on rerouting during high traffic times. But as far as physical distance goes, this is the most proximate set of schools that has long-term capacity to support the community over time. While we're in the White Oak community, a couple more. This is an area that's also saying, hey, if this has to happen, why didn't we get a traditional calendar application option at the elementary level? So we've looked at it, we've reviewed it, and feel like we want to make a planned recommendation here to adjust that and add in a calendar application for this area so that they'd have the same options as the rest of the students attending Turner Creek, which currently is Botham Elementary. And so we are proposing and adding in, we put that in the address lookup tool already, so if families are looking, they'll see that adjustment is included in today's review. The K-8 calendar alignment year-round and traditional also is in there for nuance. If you want to go through it later on, you can. But they'll have lots of options depending on how they participate with stability transfers. And so this just gives them one more way to keep K-8 calendar alignment for their families. In this case, maybe even K-12. Here's where it gets a little fun sometimes. Every year, we have a handful of communities that are like, but we want to be included. They surprise us. We'd like to be reassigned. We'd like to have a different assignment. And that's wonderful news to hear sometimes, right? Except for when what they ask you for is already crowded or capped, perhaps. But in this case, it's very thoughtful requests. There's the Trace neighborhood, the Stonemont neighborhood, even some areas near Olive Chapel. There are many others. We just wanted to highlight a few so you could know that we are hearing those requests. And so what we want to remind everyone is the primary objective of this year's enrollment plan wasn't to add things that would destabilize other neighborhoods. It was to open Hilltop Needmore and create calendar alignment, address high growth areas where we could possibly and make transportation a little bit better, and hit that lingering concern from last year with the changes from Olive Chapel and Salem into Botham that created calendar misalignment at the middle school level and cohort misalignment, middle school and high school. So these areas just weren't part of the primary objectives of this year's plan. So with that being said, the planning team is reviewing these for potential inclusion in future plans if it warrants, if it's appropriate. So it's okay. Families keep doing that because that lets us know that you have concerns that you'd like to see included in future plans. But again, we were talking a little bit before today, but I think it's really helpful for the community to hear multiple times that the planning team's goal every day that they wake up is to impact the least number of families possible each year while accomplishing the district's goals. So trying to keep the smallest number of students impacted and provide the greatest amount of stability through stability transfer rules possible has really been the goal, particularly over these last couple of years, knowing how much change has been disruptive, really ever since COVID in particular, but no one's liked change before that, but even since, like we've just noticed that behavioral and priority change for our communities. So we just want to keep reiterating that.
And I just want to throw in there that Susan's team has done a tremendous job of lengthening that runway as well, as getting out to them earlier and often, and I think that's really made a difference in the plan and the feedback that you've received over time. Thank you, Susan.
Another community that's included in this year's plan that's asking to maybe not be included is the Beckett Crossing community. We had a lot of comments asking that they get to stay assigned to Apex Friendship High rather than being assigned to Apex High. This is part of that objective number 3 of cleaning up the feeder pattern alignment. So they value those connections with that school. They don't want their students to have to lose progress that they've made in the courses there. So we continue to reiterate, this is to align that cohort. As you can see, this is the area that we're talking about. So it's embedded in that larger piece of purple that becomes green. It's in the middle of it, essentially. It creates a lovely map, if you will. From a transportation perspective, it's really helpful to our transportation department because the routes become more efficient. In addition, Apex Friendship isn't done growing. We've done a lot to relieve the crowding at this campus, and this year, as of today, for the first time, and I can't tell you how long, has not capped out a student this year, but I will say that quietly because it's been a long time coming, and the growth is on the heels of all of that relief coming quickly to this community. So you'll see that it's already projected to continue to grow over time. So not only does this create that cohort alignment, Welcome, Apex Middle, Apex High, which is a very organic and natural feeder pattern for students, it also gives us one extra little help to relieve the crowding at Apex Friendship and prepare for that growth that's coming. However, we are, again, supporting stability here. Any student that's attending the school would be eligible to stay as long as they can provide their transportation, and of course the siblings can join them as well as long as they're in school together at the same time. This takes us a little bit back to the White Oak community. There's one portion of the White Oak community called Greenmore that's a relatively large subdivision. And because of how large it was, the initial planning recommendations that you never saw said, let's take the whole community over to Turner Creek. It was a big change between White Oak and Turner Creek. It would have really reduced White Oak too rapidly, and it would have filled Turner Creek a little too quickly. So what we looked at were some topographical issues. We talked about this during the presentation, and the community shared with us, it's just but there's still a road that connects. We don't see that, and we're like, we hear you. We understand that completely. We really do. But finding some sort of pseudo-logical point to divide the community in half so that we at least have 2 school assignments, not 3, right? We've really worked on that. So that's really the reason for not including all of it or backing all of it out, because not moving that area also doesn't sufficiently support the relief we need for White Oak. So we are between a rock and a hard place here, and so that's why the planning team is recommending to go forth with continuing to take the northern portion of the community over to Turner Creek, leaving the southern portion, and then continuing to monitor and evaluate, and if and when it's appropriate, we might come back to you in a couple of years, or 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and see if we can bring those together. The other piece that's maybe not known to these families is already today, Turner Creek and Salem Middle are their calendar application options, and because they're asking out of White Oak and Mills Park, we would be very able to approve the large majority of those requests if they wanted to follow the community and go together to those 2 schools. So the families that want to join those that are being assigned into Turner Creek and Salem could easily do that using the online application period that'll be open through January, or even the transfer request period. We would work with them during that time. However, that's kind of where we are. Glenn, I think you were to add something.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, there's a precedent set for splitting some neighborhoods, and we've used geographical boundaries. I'll take you back to when we opened at Green Level High School, and we had to split the Cary Park neighborhood. It's a very similar situation here where, we would love to not disrupt the entire neighborhood, but we do the best that we can in order to fill the schools. Because again, you're chasing land, and where you can get land, and then where the developments are, and trying to make them proximate are all the things we have to consider as we do this. So we try to make it as least impactful as possible, as Susan shared.
And so that's it for some detailed, deep dive responses. Again, there's more information on the website through the FAQs that answers a lot of the other discrete questions that families have asked. How do I do this? How do I do that? How do I get my stability transfer process? What age group can do it? We had a really interesting nuanced question come from the principal at White Oak. She said, we've got some families that are currently overflowed to the designated overflow school, and they just want to know what their stability option is. Like, you know what, that's a really clarifying question we need to address. We would want you to have stability at the school you're currently attending. So whatever the overflow school is, if they're already at that school, we would allow them to have stability transfers for that school to stay there if they want to provide transportation, or they could take the new assignment to the Turner Creek Salem Middle, whichever works best for their family. So that, we'll get that out though, because I got that this morning. So we'll update our website with that question as well, and others that are similar to it that we keep capturing throughout the weeks. All right. So again, we have just the one adjustment that we're proposing today from a staff perspective. It refers back to that conversation on slides 59 and 60, and that's to add in Botham Elementary as a traditional calendar option for the families that are being proposed to come from White Oak to Turner Creek. That way they have the same option as all the rest of the Turner Creek elementary families, as well as at the middle school level, we had already included it, that they would be able to apply to Apex Middle. So where we are in the timeline, we're at the bottom of the list. There's not much left to go. So later today, you'll have your public hearing, and staff will be in attendance to take notes during that process, and if you need us, we'll be available. And then on November 18th, we plan to bring to you the final draft during work session with any revisions that are requested, maybe as a result of the public hearing, or any additional thoughts that are brought forward, so that you feel comfortable voting on it and approving it at that meeting later that night. Staff has already launched our website. The new updates to the website have already been posted. The links to the recording of this session will be added once it's available. You will have your public hearing later today. The new online forum is open. That online forum functions a little differently. So just as a reminder, there's many different ways we can use the Thought Exchange platform, if you will, and one is to do a deeper dive. This time of the cycle, we have a lot of families and community members saying, I need more than just a handful of characters. I have more to explain. So this allows them to get a little bit deeper into explaining what it is that they would like for staff or the board to know. And so we can bring you a more rich summary of that information. It prompts them to sort of give details and add more to it, so that by the time they get to the end of the cycle, they've given us a good comprehensive picture of what it is that they're concerned about and what it is that they'd like to see changed. Different from the others, they won't see each other's thoughts and rate them, because we already have that assessment. We already know how everyone feels about the different concepts. This is about getting your thoughts sort of on paper, if you will, so that we can all have a chance to review those and determine if there's any revisions that need to be made in addition to what have already been proposed. And I think, Jared, you've asked this many times. At this point, we would be looking more to remove something. This late in the process, we really wouldn't add anything, because that would be unfair to those families who typed in their address on September 2nd and didn't see an impact and said, phew, I'm done. Right, so at this time, it would just be removing, or anything that the board feels like just has to be done, and then we would do whatever engagement we would need to with impacted families to take care of that. October 29th, a week from tomorrow, we'll have a virtual session to just answer any questions that families have. We won't go through as much of the detail that we went through with you, but just we'll kind of highlight the recommended adjustments and how to find the responses, but we'll spend a lot of time just gathering questions and answering any questions that families have. We'll post that recording once it's available as well. And so then I turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Boyer. Board members, do you have any questions about the presentation or about the reassignment agenda? Ms. Evans?
Just one. Did I hear you say the Herbert Akins Middle School, that Mills Park Middle School, while we see that the capacity of the trailers is 1,352, that they actually run at 1,600?
Closer to 1,600, yes, ma'am, because of the cap.
And that's been the case
For a while.
since 2014. I just want to make sure I heard that correctly.
Vice Chair Swanson.
While schools that are in my district do not operate at that level or are struggling with enrollment. So
Same.
with that, well, one is a magnet, one is not, but they're still struggling significantly. But is there a way for those families who would like a traditional calendar option, could a West Cary or East Cary be an option for those families?
So, yeah, so what we do is when parents submit transfer requests, we obviously won't be able to provide district transportation, but we do offer the ability for families in these overcrowded traditional calendar schools to attend a more, less proximate but same calendar school. Reedy Creek, West Cary, East Cary, we often use that during the transfer process before many of the appeals get to you as the board.
And as a reminder, both East Cary and Reedy Creek are magnet schools, so today families could go ahead and start putting in those applications because that opened on the 15th if they're interested in the magnet programming at the school. And sometimes that'll come with maybe a lesser level of transportation service, but it might come with some level of transportation service as well. So they might have two ways to ask for some of those campuses.
Coming out of Mills Park Middle School, they're likely to have high priority.
Yes.
Further questions? All right. See you all a little bit later today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share.
All right, so we'll move to the next topic on our work session agenda this afternoon. This is a follow-up to our presentation at our last work session on insurance coverage for the district. So we will welcome our finance and risk management team. We'll give them a minute to set up, and then we'll proceed from there.
Are you ready for us to go?
All right. Anytime you're ready.
Okay, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. We are following up, as Chair Haggerty said, on a presentation that was made to you back at your August 19th board work session. And the purpose of today's presentation is to follow up on a number of questions board members asked during that presentation, as well as some research we've done looking at other districts and how they have looked at and in some cases gone forward with providing certain clubs or allowing their schools to provide certain levels of clubs. We've got information to share with the board on that as well. So I'm going to not put any more into it and turn it over to Ms. Posey to present the information, and we'll be glad to take all sorts of questions, either through the process or at the end.
Thank you. And again, just for time and to manage everything, let's try to put questions at the end unless you have something that's really burning and you think can get a quick answer. All right. Go ahead, Ms.
Thank
Posey.
you. And joining me, this is Trish Philbrook, so we'll refer to me as Trish or Ms. Posey. And Mr. Nathan Barnett is our Senior Director of Risk Management and then our Director of Risk Management. So they have all the knowledge base, the deep knowledge here, and they will also be here to answer any questions you may have. All right. So one of the questions you asked is about the medical insurance provided for student participants. And so Ms. Philbrook shared a little bit about the coverage that we do carry. So these are risky activities. We do carry the accident insurance provided for athletes, band, cheerleaders. So those activities that we have always covered for, I think, about 30 plus years now. And so the activities that are not covered are general club activities. And further into the presentation, you'll see where there's an insurance called All Student. And so that's the type of insurance that we only heard from one other school district that has expanded their coverage for some activities, club activities that we currently consider kind of riskier activities that our liability insurance would not cover. So this is medical insurance. And so the last time we met with you, we presented and shared what that medical insurance is. It is parent insurance, so the parents can file claims for injuries to their children. It is not insurance that we manage coverage, we pay for it, and the parent files the medical coverage. You'll see later on a slide where we have the standard plan. There's some premiums in there that you can see, not premiums, you can see the coverages for the different types of injuries. It is capped, so it's not a large insurance, but it does cover for injury. And so that was one of the questions that you all presented to us, is how do other districts do this? They do it through this medical coverage that the parent can file for claims. The next question has to do with the liability and risk in the event of an accident or injury. So our liability insurance covers general liability, bodily injury, personal injury, property damage related to school operations and premises. So activities not included in the policy can expose that would not be covered by our policies. And so adding activities such as the skateboarding or biking in the form that's been shared with us, where we would be sponsoring that, not an off-sponsor or off-premise in a sense. Those types of things would be policy exclusions as an endorsement, removing the coverage for liability. Once again, the medical coverage for the parent can still cover for injury for a child, but it does not reduce or mitigate the risk and exposure for the district when it comes to general liability. The next question, what policies are in place with other districts to cover extracurricular programs? So they don't really have policies. The one district that we heard from in New Hanover, their board had a desire to expand some of the coverage and protections for medical coverage for the students, but their liability is still not covered. They still have an exclusion for adding these activities. But they went ahead and did that, and you'll see later in the slide, we'll share the cost coverage that they're paying for their students. They are covering all student bodies. And you'll see that the young group who we work with, and they also covered 98 other districts, many, about 50%, are covering all student insurance coverage. So once again, it does not mitigate the risk of the liability coverage in the event that there was a lawsuit against the district. Those were the three primary questions that we heard from you, and so we're going to kind of continue with a little bit more information about what research we did do in reaching out to other districts. And so the current risk management guidance that we have, there is a flyer out there, and I'm going to look to Ms. Bilbrook. She can explain to you just sort of where this guidance was created from.
Sure. There's a document in the district that we share with our schools and leadership, and it was jointly created with the area superintendent's office. It's called Evaluating Risk for Student Activities and Events. And so this is the guiding document for our schools when they're determining what type of activities are permissible within the school system. It's commonly known as the no fun list. That's what principals tell me when I orient them. And so we'll take that for risk management. But it is meant to be a clear document for schools. We also provide guidance for PTAs, and that was added in the last probably 3 or 4 years, and we found that to be very helpful. So this document is housed on the Risk Management and Safety website. It's shared in numerous ways with schools, and that is our guiding document. It lists the activities which are prohibited. And so we can share that with you at any time if you're interested, but that has been in existence for quite some time. The iteration that you see today of 6 pages is more recent in the last probably 3 years.
All right. So our one school that did respond to me, so I reached out to the Big 12, and so that's my network that I reach out to with our finance officers. So New Hanover County Schools did add, they have them as conditionally approved activities. So this is their first year getting into this. And so the young group provides their insurance coverage, 88 cents per student. So they have a small population of students, so it's $22,000 for the year for their student population. They did engage in signing waivers that their legal counsel and insurance provider were involved with. That is not something we stay away from waivers, but that is with exception of the JROTC and the CTE programs. But that is something that they chose to do on their end. And then, once again, they responded back to me that they understand with their insurance carrier that there is still the risk, the financial risk with the liability. And that is the one school we heard from. We did reach out to NC Prima through the network that Mr. Burnett connects with, and there was no feedback on that. And I'm going to turn this so that you can share a little bit on that piece as
Just
well.
a little bit more information about the student accident insurance, which you seemed interested in when we last presented. And so we have been purchasing this, the district, for many, many years as a way to allow students to participate in activities that have a greater amount of risk. The groups that have been covered for many years are athletics and other things that might extend to athletics, such as band, cheerleading, ROTC activities. It also covers all of our students when they're on a field trip. And so this particular student accident insurance is a supplemental coverage for parents. It's a medical insurance that may provide out-of-pocket expenses for parents when they have to pay things like such as deductibles. Their health insurance that's primary will be considered first. This information is also on our website and has been for many years. Parents often look at that, especially when they haven't, we'll say an athlete, could be a JRTC student as well. If they want to file a claim, parents would file this claim. District purchase it, but the parent would be the one to manage the claim.
So in this slide here, you're going to see our current coverage. And so we pay $66,500 a year for the current coverage. And that is the exact same coverage that Ms. Filbert just went over. In addition to that, in order to expand it to other clubs and activities, you can see the groups covered for high-risk activities for the additional would expand it beyond. So PE, before and after school, clubs, work study, off-campus learning, evening and after-school types of concerts, plays, dances. That would be an additional $80,557. The coverage type is the same when it comes to the medical coverage and the claiming by the parent, filing it as a supplemental to their basic insurance. Those are funds that we do not have designated in our budget, so that would be something that would have to be identified if the board wanted to look at expanding to the all-student coverage. And then in the link, the base standard plan, that's where you can see the different types of coverages based on the injury.
Supposedly before you go on, and I do want to make a couple comments or add some information on this slide, because when I first heard about this additional coverage, it's like, wow, that's a slam dunk. Less than $100,000 and we can have coverage for skate club, bike club, whatever. There is coverage, as you've heard from Trish and Trish, for health, but it's limited. And it's limited to a maximum, I believe, of $25,000 in claims. And it's only for the health. It does not cover any other kind of liability if there was an accident and somebody else was injured, or it does not cover property damage. So that is an important thing to note. And I'm going to give you something. A single dismemberment is capped at $5,000. So it's likely in the event that there was some activity that the district is desirous of offering, and we can put this in place, and it does provide an additional layer to manage the risk, but it's not true full-blown risk management. It's kind of scratching the surface. Thank you, Ms. Posey.
Thank you. All right. So we have the student clubs. So student clubs, they must be based on student interest. They have to have a faculty sponsor, and they have to receive principal approval. And so risk management just really is there in the advisory capacity. So we just provide guidance to the district on those activities. It really has to be elevated from the school level before it comes to us. This is governed underneath Board Policy 6800, 6801. And so as we move forward, we would need guidance from the board as to what direction you would like staff to go. We pulled the information that's available to us and reaching out to our contacts through insurance as well as through finance officers. The medical coverage, as I said, in New Hanover, this is their first year going into that, and so they are conditionally allowed activities. And I think that if you would like to share when I get to the slide, you did look at some options of ways to do this through other sponsorships that would kind of mitigate some of the risk. Do you want to share that here as we talk through that? Because you looked at some off-campus.
Yes, there's, well, locally, there are skate parks and there are biking clubs, mountain biking clubs, where a child's parents or school would pay for it if that was the way we wanted to go with it. The liability and all the insurances would be paid as part of the fees to use the parks. So we're transferring the cost, mitigating our liabilities, and we're giving more attention to the safety of individuals. So having it out of the school's responsibilities our district's responsibilities is a better fit.
Thank you. So there are some opportunities there to look at risk exposure and through other channels of sponsorships where there are skate clubs and other things available. And we covered that one right there on the alternative models. Did you have any questions about the alternatives?
So looking at some of the alternatives, I had a couple questions, but I just real quick wanted to check to see if any other board members do it this time. Okay, I see Ms. Crawford. Let me ask mine, and then I'll come to you. Do you also questions on something? Looking at the alternatives that you presented there, I want to make clear the alternatives are there to provide student accident insurance. It's not liability coverage for the district, right? It's only insurance that the parents could take advantage of. In those cases, does providing that insurance to the families and parents shield the district from any liability if a family chose to bring a claim in addition?
No, it does not. So, a bad example, but it's a good example of an unfortunate situation. A student is seriously injured in some type of activity after school club. Let's say they lose a limb. Horrible situation. And if we as a district have this additional coverage that you've heard about, that would cover some of the costs. But again, it's got limits. And on the slide in the assembly, there are 2 links on that slide that will take you to what the actual coverages are. They're hot links. As far as a parent then who is seeking some other type of relief, they're free to move about the country and file a lawsuit for any additional medical claims, any other liability claims, negligence claims, pain and suffering, future losses, wide open.
And so providing, just to make doubly clear, providing that student insurance, whether through a fee that's recovered by the district or just providing it as a benefit, doesn't act as any sort of waiver for the families, that by accepting it, they waive any right to play. Okay.
That is correct.
Could I add one point to that? It's also, I think, counterintuitive, but important to remember that insurance, even liability insurance for the district, doesn't really protect you from liability. It provides a mechanism it provides a fund that can pay a claim, but under state law, the board is immune from negligence and tort claims as a starting point. When you purchase liability insurance, you waive that immunity to the extent of the coverage. So it's a voluntary choice to waive immunity, but you're protected in that you can't be liable beyond the extent of your coverage. So it's just, I just thought it was important to sort of get that. When we talk about liability and the scope of liability, I think staff's here talking about this extent of the coverage, but there's really not, purchasing insurance doesn't ever protect you from being sued. In fact, it's a condition to being sued for negligence claim. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I know it's counterintuitive.
Thank you. And just one last thing for me. The list of restricted activities that you identified, does that vary from provider to provider, or is that pretty universal?
What do you mean by provider?
So the insurance provider, so for example, is there a different breadth of coverage, like varying by cost? Or like some providers are more restrictive, some providers maybe are more permissive in what they cover, but then you pay for that level of...
Correct. Yeah, you can add exclusions or endorsements to any policy if you're willing to pay the higher premiums.
Okay.
And the premiums also will be based on your loss history, which could drive the cost up.
Thank you. All right. So I have Ms. Caulfield, Vice Chair Swanson, and I see Ms. Edmonds.
Thank you for bringing the information. For one clarity, before I ask my question, one piece of clarity, you said the current is $66,500.
Yes.
Is it, do you add another $80,000?
Yes.
Or, okay, so it's a total of $147.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure I had the numbers right. So that is including the 161,000 students that we have, right? That's covering everybody.
That's right.
I have a question and I have a comment. What other insurance companies have we tried as far as pricing, availability, having these kind of policies? I know you mentioned how New Hanover has broken it down, but is this information based on the same company that we have, or have we explored other options that will allow us to have these programs like the NICA Club and skating?
So we did, and you want to just share briefly kind of what some of the barriers, because we need to have specifics
Right.
to get type of pricings that you're questioning.
Yeah, in order to get a specific price for whatever you want to insure, you have to have, they'll usually want an employee, but a student count, what activities you plan to cover, how long you want to cover the policy for. If your policy prohibits it, they usually advise us against it. It's whatever you bring to the table. Like, for instance, these clubs. If we know what we're getting into and how many participants we'll have, what kind of activities we're going to allow, we put that in front of the insurance company. They write the policy based on that. And then if we have to, we can use a broker to get different quotes.
Okay. So we don't actually try with other insurance companies, we're just trying to add on a policy?
We put these out to bid on
Okay.
a regular basis as well as we do any major contracts.
Okay, and then my other comment is, I know we're talking about the cost, the $147,000, and we've got a lot of programs that go around, our schools. So one thing I would like us to consider is the engagement and physical activity and mental and emotional strength that this provides those kids. So I understand that it comes at a cost, but to me, $147,000 for an entire district, being the largest in North Carolina, to provide the peer engagement, the attendance, to actually want to come to school and be able to participate in these things with their peers, encourages our truancy issues, their grades to improve, their mental health and emotional state. And we've had numerous kids that have come up and state how these things have already helped them do that. So to me, that is very important right there. I mean, I understand the cost, I understand the liability, and appreciate all the information that comes to cover all of that and all the ifs, because there's always ifs and buts. But to me, that is something that I think we really should pay attention to. And doesn't NICA have its own insurance? How does that come into play with the liability piece that we would have to consider? With the NICA program that has come before us, they have shared with us that they have their own insurance piece.
And Nathan, I have a little more background on this, since I know you weren't here when that first came up. Depending on how the insurance is structured. So when we enter into an agreement, so we say we have the YMCA program at the school, that's a perfect example. So the Y Learning program, we have an MOA with Y Learning. They carry all the insurance coverages that we require of any contractor, $1 million policies, any type of workers' comp coverage, and we have them named the board as additionally insured. That does give us protections because we're named as additionally insured on their policy, but it does not stop people from still coming and trying to file a lawsuit with the board. And I go back to...
And then you would be
Yes.
immune unless you have liability insurance of your own that would apply to cover your employees. So if there's a suit, and you do have policies for, would cover negligence of school employees in many contexts. If an employee is negligent in supervising student club activity, the lawsuit could make that allegation. If there's indeed insurance coverage, then you could be liable up to the extent of the insurance coverage, but not beyond. If you didn't have the insurance coverage, there would be immunity. You'd still have to litigate. You'd have to file a motion to dismiss, but you could get the claim dismissed.
So I think the question with Mike is that if they had insurance, it would be the possibility of doing the same that we would do with the Y, what they name us as.
We
Is that the
would
question?
have that coverage, but to the point that Mr. Raymond was just making, if it was negligent on a staff member of the school system, they're going to come against our insurance versus it was negligent of somebody, maybe an employee of NICA or somebody volunteering, whether it was their negligence.
We always ask for the contractors to, or often to provide that additional insured coverage in hopes, partially in hopes that that coverage may satisfy the claimant and they wouldn't go after you, but there's no guarantee in it.
And I want to make one clarification on the questions Ms. Caulfield you were asking. On this coverage, we are already, I want to just confirm that we are already providing the coverage that's under the current column. That's already being provided. So this additional coverage for the additional $80,000 would provide those things. But I just wanted to be clear that we're already providing that first section. In my experience, when you get multiple parties involved in some type of liability situation, a defendant will frequently go after everybody. It's a shotgun approach.
And just point to clear up, the $66,000 that we're already paying, on the next column, it actually covers us with additional things outside of skate or NICA. It's before school and PE, which I didn't realize we weren't covered with the other one, but so we have other things that is included in helping if we were to do that.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, that's only for medical treatment. No liability, other coverages.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Swanson.
My question was answered. That was aligned with what Ms. Caulfield was raising with the bike club. So I'm interested in seeing how we could potentially do an MOU if that's the will of the board, just because we have heard from students about the importance and trying to figure out how we could make this work if that's the will of the board.
All right, thank you. Ms. Evans.
So with the alternative models, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So if it were off campus at one of the skateboarding parks, for example, and we somehow as a district endorse this club, but all of their activities take place off campus, that guards us from liability risk? Is that?
That's a question for the,
So Nathan, I think, so up top, we have some next steps with the board. Those are some things that we would need to get some points of clarification. So having a community partner or such as NICA. So that gives us some of that coverage that Mr. Ramey was sharing. It doesn't reduce it, and as Mr. Nieder said, people are going to sue everybody, they're going to name everybody. But the primary insurance would be the sponsorship club. So if we had an MOA, you had a sponsorship club, that sponsorship club carried liability insurance that they're probably paying a premium for because it's covering these riskier activities. There would be some coverage, but then it comes down to, was it one of our employees who was negligent? Was it one of the volunteers who's part of the club that was negligent? But there's still risk, but it does mitigate and reduce some of the risk. There's always exposure, but it does reduce that risk.
Okay, so may I follow up?
Please.
So in that scenario, if it were deemed an incident occurs and it were deemed that it was the district employee supervisor of this club that was negligent, the district would not have liability coverage. But if it were
Yes.
deemed that it was the NICA overseer, then their liability insurance would cover.
They would have liability insurance, and the way that we structure our MOAs, or memorandum of agreements, is that the Wake County Board of Education would be named additionally insured.
That also does
And I
not
do-
waive your liability.
That doesn't waive our liability, yeah.
I mean, your immunity, sorry.
Our
Doesn't waive your
immunity, yeah,
immunity. You would remain immune if somebody else provides the liability coverage.
I'm sorry, say that again?
If another group provides liability coverage, you retain your immunity, even if you contractually require it. So if you have a policy with an outside group, you must have a liability insurance policy. You must name the Wake County Board of Education as an additional insured. That would not waive your immunity. You would still be able to assert immunity if this district was sued. But you would have the coverage. That's the way you can have your cake and eat it, too. There's a case law on point on that.
I have a case that, I wonder if that counts that, but I'll hold it for
Wake
now.
County, Wake County.
No, this is Wake County.
Yeah, it's a Wake County, County Commissioner's case.
Okay.
Yep.
Ms. Evans, did you have a follow-up?
No.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Let me, so for some folks that haven't asked questions yet, we'll do Mr. Hershey, Dr. Ing, and then Ms. Caulfield. Did you have another one?
So I'm just kind of curious how, like, who defines high-risk activities? And are we really not covered for things like school concerts and plays and dances? And what kind of potential exposure do we have?
There, things like that would be under our general liability coverage, and trying to give a distinction between, let's say, something like a bike club or a skating club, and let's say a dance or a concert at a school. Our insurers have not explicitly told us that those will not be covered. Whereas for some of these clubs, they have explicitly told us, you can do it, but it's not covered under your policy.
Do we need to ask them, or do we need, like,
We have.
and they just don't tell us? kind of
No,
thing,
our general activities like that are covered.
like- Okay. I'm
It's
just
some of
seeing
these
that,
specific higher risk activities where there's a higher likelihood that an injury or some type of damage may take place.
But if I can, I think
Yeah.
it's important to remember there's two kinds of insurance here.
right.
And, an activity where someone is injured in one of those situations, a concert or a dance, our liability coverage, if I'm correct, still covers us. What's not covered is that student accident insurance where there'd be a policy that would pay out directly to the family, like it would for a sports team or JROTC. That's what they're talking about here. The extra $80,000 would be a different policy. On one hand, you have liability for the school, on the other hand, you have insurance for students. And this would provide insurance company for the students that would pay the family directly. We don't have that now for everything in that right-hand column,
Yeah.
but our liability coverage, which is different than student accidents
Okay.
insurance, would protect us.
As someone who was in the band for 4 years, I chuckle at the idea that school concerts are in the high-risk activities category. So that was kind of where I was.
Saxons are pretty heavy, I don't know.
I mean,
Drop it on your
tubas
toe,
are,
you can lose
but-
a toe.
Yeah,
That with a trombone?
I guess.
All right, did you have any other?
No, I'm good.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hershey. Dr. Ing?
And thank you. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of this. I mean, looking at the coverage for what, I feel like we're kind of conflating two things. And the coverage for the medical coverage for the students, it's piddly. It's nothing. I mean, for the amount of money that is charged for a dismemberment, I mean, it's definitely greater than $5,000 cost. So certainly there is a need for considering that for any activities that we are participating in. But I mean, in order for our liability insurance with the company, the insurance company, are they requiring us to have a higher level of accidental insurance in order to cover us for these things? Or I'm not quite sure what we're driving at this point. I mean, yes, it's great that we can have better coverage for medical coverage for our students, but it's still, the point of liability is a separate issue, I think.
Yes, and I would concur with your statements, Dr. Eng. And I guess my view of this additional coverage, it is not for a disaster. It is not for a catastrophe. It is not for a dismemberment. It is for, if there is such a thing, a more routine, mundane injury that may be in the hundreds or a couple $1,000s of cost. It is a way to benefit the parents and the student to cover those costs, but it is not catastrophic insurance, and it is not liability insurance, to your point.
So are we moving towards paying the higher level of insurance for our coverage for our students so that we can have more protection as a school system? Is that what we're saying?
Well, I think, and Ms. Posey, and there was one slide that we didn't get to yet. I'll just flip it up there, but I'll turn it back to you, Chair Kennedy. Kind of were, in our minds, potential next steps that the board might want to work through and discuss through. One being looking at this coverage. Is it something that the board is interested in pursuing? And that covers the $80-some thousand for the, albeit limited, medical coverage that it would provide the parents in those additional activities. Policy clarification, we use the term policy, not necessarily board policy, of a stance, and we use New Hanover as an example. They made a decision to take on additional risk by offering an activity without having full liability coverage for it. So that was a policy decision, if you will, not a board policy.
Or precedent.
A precedent. And I do not know if they have set aside reserves for that or what their plan is to be prepared for when and if that risk does truly arise. Community partnerships, and then really one of the things, and this is perhaps more staff, we think that we can tweak, there's nothing broken, but we think we can tweak a little bit how we conduct an approval process for some type of new activity in a school, so that the different parts of our organization, whether it's school administration or the area superintendents or academics or risk management, there are a lot of different pieces in here, can coordinate with each other.
Thank you. Ms. Caulfield?
I just wanted to go back to, add to what I said before. If we send the students out into the community to engage in these type of programs, we have to consider they'll need transportation, the timing to do that, because they won't just be doing it right after school, availability in the different communities if they have these programs. And it's not school peer engagement, you're now going into the community. So like the things that I was mentioning before, like truancy, engagement, physical activity, mental, emotional, those are all things that kind of attract them to get more engaged in our schools and just has a whole, like, a more holistic improvement for that child with our schools. So I agree with, it seems like a much smaller cost for the benefit that it would provide our children. So I was also curious, what would be the next steps for us to move forward?
So I think at this point, if you see the next steps for the board discussion up there, and I know staff, you didn't have a chance to really discuss all of them, the questions sort of took us off a little bit, but if this is something that is of interest, we can bring it back at either a future work session or as it's a budget item, maybe a budget or finance committee meeting, where we could look at exactly like what the real cost differences would be and sort of take the board's temperature. Do you think this is worth it? I mean, Dr. Ng raises some good points about, yes, it's coverage, yes, it's a benefit to the student, but if it doesn't shield the district from liability, has it really changed the equation, right? But at the same time, if it does encourage and give a little more protection for some after-school activity, for some clubs, for some things that might help increase attendance, for extracurriculars, we could weigh that. And one thing that, like our team has said, is that oftentimes the cost of the insurance is based on the claim history. So it'd be interesting to go back and see what claim history has been in Wake County for some activities. And, if it's been very, very high, that might make it a higher risk for you. If it's been very, very low or very rare, you might be more willing to accept that. So I think what we could do is maybe bring it back at another future meeting and explore some of these in more detail. We need to move on, but Ms. Edmonds, I see your hand.
Oh, I just wanted to support that I don't think anybody disagrees with you about the benefits of these at all. If I'm wrong, somebody speak up. And therefore, I think it is worth our time to dig deeper and bring it back for a discussion. So I just wanted to ask that we actually do that, yes.
All right.
Thumbs up.
Does that sound like a plan? And that's something we can work out.
And may I? I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
Ms. Posey, can you aggravate those 11 districts that did not get back to you? Didn't I hear you say that you reached out to the 12, but New Hanover was the only one?
So Durham, Charlotte, basically everyone was like, no, we don't.
So they did respond.
Yes, they didn't expand. I said, usually we have a quick network.
Sure.
And I said, if anybody allows this, can you let me know what it is and how you're doing it? And it was only one.
So the others, we did hear back, they're not doing it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate all the information.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so at this point, we're going to move to the post-pandemic student devices strategy plan. This presentation reaches a number of different areas that we've talked about in policy. It impacts policy, it impacts budget, it impacts educational achievement, classroom options, and so we're going to get every answer resolved today as part of this presentation. Michael, I'm putting it all on you. We'll give everyone a minute to transfer everything over. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to jump right in because I know we're pretty tight on time, but I think we have a lot of time enough time to accomplish the things I think we'd like to accomplish with this meeting. So I just kind of wanted to remind board members, we did this around cell phones probably 8 months ago, and I think you'll remember we had a similar kind of conversation where we really spent some time in small groups with board members, kind of asking some focusing questions, getting the temperature of where board members are at, the things that you need to know to make decisions. And so that was the cell phone policy 9 months ago. And today we're really here to talk about instructional devices that the district is purchasing. So we really, we intend this session, I think, to really get a lot of your sort of feedback and input, and that'll be very helpful. If you look at our agenda, we want to kind of spend some time outlining a vision for the use of instructional technology. One of the things that we've really had a conversation about is that it comes down to how the devices are used. And we all can imagine scenarios where they're used creatively and expansively to do really powerful learning experiences. We can also imagine the opposite of that, right? So I think one of the things I just wanted to say as we start out is that we just want to kind of, as we have this discussion, like resist the urge to either be I'm like a tech skeptic or I'm a tech advocate, right? Probably all of us have both of those inside of us, right? So I think as we have this conversation, we just want to think through, very importantly, how are the devices that we're providing to students in the school district supporting learning? So that's really kind of our focus. And we're really going to have two main activities. We want, the academics team is going to outline generally a vision for the use of instructional technology, and then we're going to break into breakout sessions, and we can just monitor the time to make sure that we can devote adequate time to it. And we're just going to have a couple focusing questions, get some feedback, and then as you can see on the screen, we're going to come back in December really thinking about a long-term strategy. One of the things that I think is really important to say at the outset, just a constraint, is that if we are making, if decisions are made that affect the 26-27 school year for devices, they would really need to be made by the end of this year. So that's one of our sort of ways that we're working. But I also don't think that our plan is going to be necessarily turn the ship immediately, right? I think we can think about this in stages, and we just really need to get your feedback, I think, to think that through. So that's what we're going to do. So just quickly, I'm just going to frame this, and then we will turn it over to Dr. Hill to talk a little bit about our vision, and then go into our breakout sessions. Again, I think it's pretty obvious, but this stuff really aligns with the strategic plan. And if you think about, I was thinking about the 4 C's, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. We can all imagine how devices are used to further those things, to further communication and communication effectiveness, to build really creative products, right, that are impossible without computers. We can also imagine how they could be used in ways that don't support the things below, which is the foundational literacy, the knowledge in reading, language arts, and mathematics. So very much aligned to that. Secondly, we know that we must deliver high-quality core instruction in all content areas. So that's part of what we want to think about. It's not just the device, but it is how it is used. So it really aligns to the strategic plan. Again, we are starting with the academic vision for this because it's very easy to sort of have conversations about how much screen time is too much screen time and that sort of narrative, and instead we want to ask, what are the learning objectives and how are the devices and how they're used supporting that? So we really want to start with the learning needs and instruction driving technologies. And I think, as we said in terms of how we titled this session, Wake County, like many, many other districts, is at a point where, thinking a lot about post-pandemic, we know that during the pandemic, pretty much every school district moved rapidly to one-to-one. That was rough in some cases, potentially changed things, changed practices. But this, I think, is our opportunity, and as we move into the breakout sessions, we really want you to be thinking about that last question: what should our approach to provisioning devices be over the long term? So we really want to get some level of alignment on this. And I think one of the things that we'll really ask for you as you think about this and you think about the strategy that we put forth and sort of supporting that strategy, what are the things you need to know? What are the range of decisions that as policymakers you're thinking about? And we want to collect that stuff today. So really think of today as an opportunity to gather data. So really, in the end, what we want to do is a renewed school issue instructional technology use strategy. It will begin to impact deployment in 26, 27. So we want to think about the devices, obviously think about take-home policy and things like that, and what devices are provided to what students. So that's really the frame of what we want to do. So the last two things we have to do really are to turn it over to academics to talk a little bit about the vision for instruction, and then we're going to move into some breakout groups, get you guys to give us some feedback. And what do we need to do in terms of timing on this? I just want to make sure that we end where we need to.
So we need to have a hard stop by 5:25. If you get out a few minutes before that, that's a bonus, but 5:25, we're moving to the other
And that
end.
includes the last item, or not inclusive of the last item?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, 5:15.
Okay, breakdown. Excellent. Okay, very helpful. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hill and her team to talk a little bit about the instructional vision before we go into breakouts.
All of us woke up Monday morning and we could not log into our devices. And technology was really and truly at the forefront of what we value because we were all paralyzed. But we did find some avenues around that. And so when we look at those three big buckets of what we value in technology in the hands of teachers is going to amplify that teaching, and it strengthens the core. So we first have standards that we have to teach, and standards drive our instruction. But if it's going to be amplified and intensified with the use of technology, we want to make sure that our teachers have that at their disposal. Equity and access. No child should not have that access to any technology device to make their learning not as enhanced as it can be. And the last bucket that we want to look at is, it is about empowerment and support of those students and their learning. So we've been having this conversation, and we want to go now and look at those priorities that we look at from an instructional lens for the use of technology. We have Allison Reed and Mr. Charles Patton here who've been working collaboratively with our technology department because it is a partnership between these two divisions as we look at enhancing our program.
So as we look at identifying, when we're starting to think about strategy and what do we need to think about and consider when we are planning for a device strategy in the years moving forward, we first have to start with what problem are we trying to solve? Why do we need technology at all? And before we can answer that question, we have to be clear and have some consensus on what our priorities for the use of that technology are. And so my team, Charles, led by Charles, has done a lot of work. This is the work we've done for years anyway, but in terms of articulating those, to bring them to this group, to get some consensus, we've narrowed it down to, I believe, 7, which I know is not, well, it's not a round number there, but we're going to walk through, and I'm going to ask Charles to sort of walk us through. So when we're clear about what we want to use the technology for, then the decisions after that become easier. So I'm going to hand it off to you since this is the majority of your work.
Hello, Mr. Hershey. I did band for a very long time, and I'm happy to report a healthy dose of nerves at the current moment.
It would be great.
So there are 7 things here. There are 6 that directly impact students, and then there is a 7th that impacts students as it applies to the adult's ability and capacity in the space. First and foremost is the idea of developmental match. I don't know if you've ever seen a kindergarten trying to open a Chromebook, but they have their leg involved and they're like bent over it trying to carry it. It is a physically imposing device for them to handle in many cases. And at the other end, we have students who we are certifying in Adobe products and in Microsoft products. And at some point, you run into capacity barriers with the physical device, allowing them to be developmentally matched. So our core priority here is making sure that the devices serve the goals in the moment. And we know that we have a variety of developmental levels in classrooms, pre-K through 12. And with that come the need to really evaluate, can one device meet the needs of every student, right? So we have to consider things like form factor, function, processing, and all those things as a first step. Beyond that, we move into, and I want to call back the strategic plan because goal number 1 specifically names digital literacy as one of the core competencies that we're supposed to develop in students. So when we think about complex and relevant tasks, we also have vision in the strategic plan that says students will live a full and productive life in a complex and changing world. We don't do maps, right? I love sitting here listening to Susan's presentation because I know what the geospatial analytics team does. Why do we need to design paper maps for students to interact in, right? We need to be giving them exposure to industry standard, relevant things, ways to experience maps, ways to experience math and modeling and spatial reasoning that can exist through digital resources. And it's not so much that they don't exist outside of that, but it scales to allow teachers to enable that for every kid each day in the classroom. Third is multimodal, and you heard Dr. Hill talk on this, the idea of accessibility. The National Educational Technology Plan outlines 3 separate digital divides. The first one we've talked about is very obvious. Can we get a device to kids? It's the access divide. But there's 2 more that are really critical. One is the design divide. Are we providing the resources for teachers to know how to use that the right way? And are we designing curriculum that functions in a digital space, right? We're coming out of COVID where we had a bunch of PDFs or other things that are physical resources that we put into digital space. We didn't actually have time to design for the potential of digital space. And so that is the next step. Multimodal also means that students that need speech to text can have it at the click of a button. We don't need we don't have to ask a teacher to spend time beyond their regular planning time. We can empower students with their own agency as experts to say, oh, I need this resource, and I can leverage Canvas or the read-write extension that we are already providing for them to be the professional learner that they want to be. We can empower that student agency, which speaks to the strategic plan through the devices that we provide. 4 is feedback loops. We have a lot of research on the power and impact of feedback for students, the ability to do that quickly and, again, multimodally. Canvas in many ways is not that fancy, but it is a really great example for how we can activate that modality and feedback for students. It is powerful that students can submit writing or a video or audio. If we think about our foreign language teachers, right? For a long time, they've had to give speaking assignments that had to be done in person, and that took them scheduling time out of their teaching to ensure that assessment could happen. And now we're able to move the idea of speaking and presentation out of the classroom. My daughter just had to perform her Nutcracker playing test for the upcoming performance of Powell Elementary School's The Nutcracker, and she had to submit it via Canvas. And she was like, Dad, how do I do this? Of course, she's a shy kid, so she had to go in another room and close the door and record it 75 times. I am past the Nutcracker at this point, but here we are. Active and collaborative learning structures. We have a long time, right? Like part of the issue with the way we do classrooms is that it's a scale of economy. And at the ideal space to exist with students and learning, like, is the idea of feedback and interaction, right? We want humans to engage as humans. But in a room, embodied, the reason we write so many papers is because that was a way to capture student idea and take it with you to time later. But now, we can actually do that in real time without it being loud so that it's not so distracting in a classroom. We can put kids into a shared collaborative slide deck in Google and ask them to build. They can see other ideas happening in real time and reflect on their own thinking. And that idea of peer-to-peer construction is highly valuable. You can check out the research by Mickey Chi and the idea of moving from passive and active learning to interactive and constructive learning. Digital tools and the devices we provide allow every teacher to scale that into their classroom in real time. And then finally, the last piece for students is the idea of digital literacy and executive function. I don't know how many of you grew up in elementary schools where you learned how to use a card catalog. I spent many time in Department of Defense schools learning how to use a card catalog, and I was obsessed with space like many other kids. And so I got very familiar with the moon or space or asteroids or quasars, right? I went to the card catalog and I looked it up. When Google came around, I was able to apply an analog executive function to a digital space, and I was able to function. I know what it's like to have to keep things organized in a file folder, so I know how to organize my Google Drive. I don't know if you've ever seen a student's Google Drive. It looks really neat because it's snapped into a grid. But in reality, and actually here's a better example, we provide a login portal for every kid, the portal that was down the other day. And students are excited because they can customize it. And what that means for my daughter is that when she logs into Wake ID portal, she has 18 folders named after her best friends, and they're in different colors, and she's very excited about that. But why Dreambox is in Samantha's folder, I'll never know. And what that is doing, to your point, you worked really hard on a personal device strategy to ensure alignment and coherence and a lack of distraction in the classroom. That policy deserves to be met with intentional design. And so we have to provide really intentional ways and mechanisms to ensure that executive function is modeled and supported in digital spaces, right? So locking those things down, ensuring that icons are in the same place. UDL would speak to the idea of the predictability of the learning environment. And so those outline the 6 direct impact things for students. And then finally, we have the 7th. And this has to do with, I think, one of the most impactful things we've seen in COVID, right? We, on March 13th, 2020, it was a Friday, and I remember going home and having many PTA parents be like, so what are we going to do about prom in May? And for a while, we thought prom was going to happen. And then all of a sudden it was June, and we were trying to figure out how we were going to do graduation. And then all of a sudden it was September, and we're like, can we have kids in the building? And it was a very strange time. But we had learning happening all of that time. And teachers had to figure it out, and they had to find tools, and companies made them available. And that completely reduced the idea of coherency. We have roughly 3,600 different digital resources used across this district every day. And what we have to do is provide, similar to the executive function for students, we have to provide a consistent and transparent suite of tools. Because what we don't need is students learning a new tool in the classroom to learn math. They need to learn math because they're using consistent tools, right? So the idea of moving towards a core suite of resources. And that moves a little bit beyond the device, but I don't know if you've talked to teachers about Promethean panels, right? Like, that's one more thing they have to learn to use. Or a document camera is one more thing they have to support in their classroom. And the digital learning coordinators are out there, and they are going into classrooms and supporting some of that. The ISTs are out there, and they are in classrooms, and they're putting hands on to try and make that happen. Those teams scaling to the size of the district, it's tricky. So we have to make sure that the platforms we provide are predictable, and teachers understand them enough to adapt their curriculum to the needs of their kids using those tools. And it can't be a new lift every year for every teacher in every classroom. Oh, there's one more. You want this one? Okay.
You got your own.
We mentioned this a little bit earlier, right? So the goal here is we have this vision. Wake County public school system students will be prepared to reach their full potential and lead productive lives in a complex and changing world. When we think about complex and changing world, I think about talking to my colleagues who are still working with high school students trying to find their first job, and they can't work fast food anymore because fast food front operations are being replaced by AI. We owe them a different skill set, and that skill set is not going to be paper-based, right? So we have to meet the job demands and the complexity of communication. There's a really interesting book as a follow-up to The Anxious Generation called Stolen Focus by Johan Hari, and he talks about the idea of who can afford to be disconnected. How many people rely on a bus and they have to track it in real time, and that puts them on a phone with a bunch of notifications that are designed to distract you. Right now, all of a sudden, it's a luxury to not be in the world where you're distracted all the time. So our job is to build a technological environment around that with the same consideration that teachers spend on their seating arrangement, on what's going to be on their bulletin board the first day of school so that kids smile when they walk in the room. Kids deserve the same intention in the digital space and consistency pre-K through 12 to make that happen.
Great. Thank you, Charles. Anything else? So I think what we wanted to do is kind of start out with thinking about the starting with the end in mind, right? This is what we want devices to be able to support in the classroom and sort of the vision for that. And now we're going to move into a section of time, and we're going to kind of divide up into 3 groups. Folks from this group, Malada, Allison, Charles, and myself, will each go with a group. And we'd love to just have a conversation with you. And again, this is really thinking about, as a policy-making body, and thinking about the district's approach to technology over the long term, right? Not thinking about just like what decision are we going to make for 26, 27, but as we think about this into the future, what are the things that are important for you? So we're going to ask you to kind of respond to some of the things that Charles presented. We're going to ask you to think about, what's most important to you about our device strategy, what questions you need to have answered. That will also be part of it. And then kind of we'll take basically 35 minutes. That should be fine, and that should meet our, keep us on time. And we're going to break out into groups, get some of your ideas captured, and then that will help inform what we come back to you all in December with, in just an overview of the devices strategy that we're planning to approach. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so the groups are going to be Ms. Gordon, Mr. Hershey, Dr. Ng. You can be in here with Allison and Charles. Mr. Hegarty and Ms. Caulfield with Malada. You guys can be in here. And then just to spread out our space, I can take Mr. Swanson, Ms. Rice, and Ms. Edmonds, and we can step out into the other, just right outside the door there, just so that we have a little bit of space. So we're going to have about 35 minutes to engage that conversation, get your feedback, and then we'll come back together and close out.
They do.
productive conversation, lots of really helpful feedback. I think as we'll gather this feedback, pull it together, we've already gathered some feedback from the community. We're going to come back in December, kind of with an overview of the strategy, informed by some of the questions and feedback that you all provided. I just really appreciate everybody engaging in that. It's very helpful for us to, I think, be able to bring alignment between where the board's at and the plan moving forward. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Again, there's a lot here. We know this is a serious topic, requires a lot of serious thought, but it's a big transition, right? We fundamentally changed the way we were delivering educational services, and we had to do it in the process. It's like a former superintendent had said, we're building the airplane while we're on the runway. But now it's time to take a look, see where we are, and the best way to make that airplane fly. So thank you all. I appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing the report back. All right. We have one final item on our work session agenda tonight, which is just an update on our District 8 vacancy. I did want to report back briefly that we have received some additional nominations. At this point, even with our new information that we put out there, we're still having some confusion. We do have 6 candidates currently. So as we plan our interviews and what our day might look like, we know that unless anyone removes themselves from consideration, we will have 6 candidates to interview. We did have another additional candidate who applied. Their documentation shows they actually live in District 5, not District 6, even though they do have an Apex address. So we keep putting information out there. We can only hope that people will use it, and we don't want them to invest a lot of time into applying for a position that they're not eligible for. But again, there's only so much that we can do. But it does look like, based on the applications we've received and based on the vetting, that we do have 6 applicants at this point. All right? Are there any questions with that? If not, all right, then I will call our work session adjourned, and that'll give us a few moments before we transition over into our general meeting. Thank you.